Being Whitney Houston's daughter can put a lot of pressure on one person. I'm here to prove to the world that I am my own person.
Bobbi Kristina just want to say, that's your hand.
My baby, my baby, my baby. Thank you so much.
At 3:55 p.m. this afternoon, Whitney Houston was pronounced dead at the Beverly Hilton Hotel.
For Bobbi Kristina, the death of her mother wasn't just a moment of grief. It was the beginning of a devastating downward spiral. Her story would unfold like a dark mirror of her mother's own, filled with love, loss, addiction, unresolved trauma, and the crushing pressure of fame. In less than 3 years, Bobbi Kristina would find herself trapped in an eerie, almost prolific fate, echoing her mother's untimely passing under hauntingly similar circumstances. We need to peel back the layers of Bobbi Kristina Brown's life, starting from the beginning, to uncover the heartbreaking tale of a daughter caught in the shadow of her mother's legend and the legacy that she left behind. To understand the devastating arc of Bobbi Kristina's life, we have to go back to the beginning and uncover the layers of a story shrouded in pain, love, and secrets.
Oh, don't forget me, I bet I'll remember you said. Sometimes I rest in love, but sometimes it hurts instead.
Before we dive in, let me leave you with this quote, something that will haunt this story all the way through. Somebody once said, "Follow the money," and that's what it's all about. Remember those words, because as we unfold this tragedy, you will start to see how money and the people who control it play a far larger role than you ever would have imagined. Now, let's take a closer look at the life and legacy of Bobbi Kristina Brown. The truth is darker and more complicated than anyone could have predicted. At the height of Whitney's superstar fame, she was on top of the world at the box office and the music charts, dominated by the movie The Bodyguard. And during the premieres, she was the most excited about anything but Hollywood. Instead, she was most excited about being a mother.
Yes, Bobby is the man of my life, and I'm very much in love and I'm very happy.
Is he the man you want to marry?
Yeah, and he's the man I want to have children with. That's the one thing that I know that I don't have that I want. I'm very happy. You know, it's a joy to me. It's a blessing. It's exciting because as a mom, you're bonded already, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing? We sing and we talk and, you know, I watch my stomach for hours just watching how it moves, you know, and when she hears her father's music, you know, I'm telling you something. I say she because I think it's a girl, but you don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. And I don't want to say.
During this time, Whitney was pregnant with what would be her only child, Bobbi Kristina Brown. From the moment Bobbi Kristina was born, Whitney's dreams centered on one thing, being a mom.
With a great man, and I thought, I think I'll have this baby. Somehow motherhood, being a mother, period, you kind of stop living for yourself and you start living for your children. You know, everything that I do, everything that I think, everything that I say, Bobbi Kristina is on my mind when I do it.
Did you ever get scared and say, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I'll screw it up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, every day. Almost every day.
The birth of her daughter was not just a miracle, it was her salvation. After suffering a devastating miscarriage, Whitney prayed for another chance. And when Chrissy was born, she believed that she would conquer the world. With the love of her life, Bobbi Brown, at her side, they embarked on what seemed like a fairy tale journey. But fairy tales rarely end happily ever after. All Whitney wanted to do was stop the touring, stop the shows, stop the movie. She wanted to stay at home and be a mother to Bobbi Kristina, who they affectionately called Chrissy. But Whitney was pressured to do more, go back on the road, promote the album, and with that, she took Chrissy with her. And Bobbi Brown took a backseat with his career to go on the road with his family.
93, 94, 95 was filled with bodyguard years. I was on a whirlwind by that point in time.
Bobbi Kristina, Kristina, Kristina. I was going everywhere. That record was so huge. I had my baby in one hand, and I had the man of my life that I loved so very much, and I was crazy for with me. And he had just put everything aside of his own and just said, "I'll go with you. Don't worry about it." I think somewhere inside, something happens to a man when a woman has that much fame.
Yeah. If he doesn't have his own.
Doesn't have his own.
Has to have his own.
Now, this whole thing may have pushed Whitney to start using again. It may have been the catalyst, but what we do know is that while they were on the road, this was no way for her child to grow up.
Going on tour is tough for you as a mom. Is Bobbi Kristina going to go?
Yeah, she'll do the summer tour with me. The hard one is the European tour.
Yeah.
Because that'll be in September, and she starts first grade this year.
But this was Bobbi Kristina's life. On the road with her parents, who during this time started to have a very tumultuous and rocky relationship. The arguing between Bobbi and Whitney would get worse, and caught in the middle was Chrissy, who had a front seat to it all. Bobbi Kristina grew up in a household that from the outside seemed like the epitome of fame and glamour, but behind closed doors, it was a very different story. As much as her parents, Whitney and Bobbi, tried to shield Bobbi Kristina from their struggles, Chrissy was no stranger to the chaos that defined their lives. The fights, the arguments, the tension, it was all there. Nothing was off limits. And as much as they tried to keep their drug use hidden from their young daughter, Chrissy saw it with her own eyes. How could two parents clearly consumed by their own demons possibly give their daughter the care and stability that she so desperately needed? The harsh truth was simple. They could not. This dysfunction, this heartbreaking reality played out on television for the world to see when the couple's infamous reality show, Being Bobbi Brown, aired in 2005.
It was really like being Bobbi Brown.
And what was supposed to be an inside look at the lives of one of the most powerful musical couples of all time quickly devolved into an unrelenting disaster. Not only was Whitney's already frail public image shattered further, but a young Chrissy was thrust into the spotlight that she wasn't ready for.
Chrissy, sister.
Chrissy. That's the annoying one. I'm not annoying.
This show, which lasted only one season, was a chaotic spectacle that seemed to do little more than exploit the very people it was supposed to portray. Bobbi Brown, Whitney Houston, and an 11-year-old Bobbi Kristina, along with her two half-siblings, became the fodder for a public hungry for drama. The cameras captured it all. The bizarre behavior, the screaming matches, and the increasingly erratic moments that left viewers more disturbed than entertained. And instead of evoking sympathy or concern for the family struggles, the show became a source of mockery. Viewers laughed at the dysfunction, and rather than reflecting on the deep pain beneath the surface, it wasn't just a failure as entertainment. And the damage that it did to Bobbi Kristina was immeasurable. For Chrissy, this was her reality, a life defined by addiction, public scrutiny, and the devastating effects of watching her parents implode on screen, with no one around to protect her from the fallout. It was clear that the love and stability that she needed were not there, and the world watched as it unraveled. During a time when children are already trying to find their own identity, they want to fit in and be accepted, it was hard for Chrissy in school. She always felt as though she had to defend her parents from being laughed at and the jokes and the snickers in school.
I heard that you also don't, that in the beginning you used to laugh at the tabloids, but you don't laugh anymore because you have a child.
Yeah, it's not that funny anymore because she has to go to school with other children, who are, children can be mean, you know what I mean? And they don't mean to be, but they, they're very painfully honest. So, what they read, what they see, what they hear from their parents, they come back to school with it a lot, And, I'm very protective of her.
But it wasn't just the tabloids that Chrissy had to contend with. At the heart of it all, Chrissy, this young innocent girl caught in a nightmare of volatile arguments, emotional instability, and a crushing uncertainty. There was a close relative that spoke candidly to People magazine, and that person painted a chilling picture of the couple's home life. They were quoted as saying they fought like cats and dogs. It could be anything, a dinner choice, who forgot to unload the dishwasher. The smallest things set them off. And it was always loud, always angry, always chaos. This wasn't just a couple having a rough patch. It was a house on fire, and young Chrissy was in the middle of the blaze.
He was my drug. I didn't do anything without him. I wasn't getting high by myself. It was me and him together.
At just 13 years old, Chrissy was growing up in an environment far from what any child should know. The air was thick with the haze of drugs and anger and punctuated by screaming matches and unpredictable mood swings. For Chrissy, normalcy was a foreign concept. How could she possibly thrive in a world where even basic decisions like what to have for dinner turned into full-blown wars? No child should have to witness their parents disintegrating before their eyes. It was clear this was toxic. It's an unstable home, one where love seemed to fade into something darker by the day. And Whitney's decision to file for divorce a year after the airing of Being Bobbi Brown was more than just a personal choice. It was an act of desperation. She needed to escape, and more urgently, she needed to give Bobbi Kristina a fighting chance at something resembling normalcy. But normalcy, unfortunately, was not in the cards for Chrissy. Bobbi Kristina was damaged from the neglect that she dealt with as a child, forced to share her home with two people who, it is reported, would sometimes spend days chasing for their next high, while their daughter had no choice but to look on in fear.
There were days that you would lock yourself in a room and you would stay there and you would, not speak to people for days. Is any of that true? Do you feel that she saw too much, she heard too much, experienced too much?
She saw enough.
And Chrissy and Whitney did not have a normal mother and daughter relationship. Chrissy always felt the need to protect and look after her mother. And while they had a very close relationship, it was more like having a sister or best friend than it was having a mother and a protector and a provider.
I stay by her side. That's like my best friend. That's like my sister. Like
your best friend, like your sister.
Yeah.
And it's very telling that Chrissy felt that she needed to protect Whitney more than the other way around. Before the end of Whitney and Bobbi's relationship, things started to get dark and weird in the house.
There was times where, he would smash things, break things in the home. Glass. We had a big, giant portrait of me and him and my child. He cut my head off the picture.
According to Whitney, Bobbi started drawing strange figures on the wall and things that were described as being drawn as evil with evil eyes. And he even started to defile pictures of Whitney that were hanging on the wall.
To paint in our room, my bedroom. Eyes, just eyes, evil eyes that were looking at every point of the room.
He started to paint on the walls?
Yeah, the rugs, the walls, the closet doors. If I opened the doors, there would be like one picture, and then I closed them, and there'd be another picture, and it would be just these eyes and faces, and it was really strange.
Where was Bobbi Kristina in all of that craziness?
I got her out the house earlier than I had left. I placed her with my brother, Gary, and my sister-in-law, Pat, who lived 5 minutes down the street from me, because it was getting to be a little much. And they took care of her further, like 5th and 6th grade, while she went to school. While I just, tried to get it all together and say, what was I going to do? Where was I going to go? How was I going to do this? How was I going to get out of this? And once I made some moves, I took her with me to California, and we lived there for a year and a half.
The addiction was getting bad, and Whitney knew that it was time to leave. She ended up leaving their Atlanta home and moving to the LA area, the Laguna Beach, for the next year, and she brought Chrissy with her. And she filed for divorce shortly after and requested full custody. But during this time, Chrissy was extremely confused. She liked her parents being together. And although there's not much discussed about this topic, but it is my belief that this was a big contention in Whitney and Chrissy's relationship at the time.
As you get older, I'll tell you little by little as to why things are happening and why mommy has to go. But we got to California and she was very angry. Did not understand. She fought me. But I kept coming back with love. I kept holding her in my arms. I kept knocking on that door and I kept getting on my knees. I kept praying, telling her I loved her.
1 year after filing the divorce and living on their own, it was reported that Chrissy was so angry about her living situation that she tried to stab Whitney before trying to hurt herself on her own wrists. And this allegedly occurred days before her 15th birthday.
Whitney asked me to meet her at the hospital. Chrissy had taken a knife and slashed her arms. She hated her life. She hated her mother. She even went as far as writing, "I wish I could find a way to kill her and no one find out about it.
I believe that Chrissy's dissatisfaction with her living arrangement and believing that one day her parents would get back together, because even Whitney waited for Bobbi to come back to her. What Whitney was hoping to do after she left Bobbi was that Bobbi would have a wake-up call and change his ways and his behavior and come back, and they would be a family together. And sometimes he would promise to come back, but then he never did.
I waited for him. I did. I waited for him to come back to say all the stuff that he was doing. And he was doing a lot of ugly things. I just kept thinking, he's dragging this into my home with my daughter. I can't have this. I can't let her think that this is love or this is the way that it should be.
And I think this devastated not only Whitney, but also Chrissy. And they were left missing that male figure in their lives. And this was the perfect storm for how friend of Chrissy, Nick Gordon, eventually filled that void and weaseled his way into their lives. Nick had always been in the background, a constant but unofficial figure in Chrissy's life, someone more like a shadowy extra in her personal movie, a friend, a confidant, and in many ways, an unofficial brother. The story goes that Nick moved in with Whitney and Chrissy when he was just 12 years old. But that would mean that he was living under their roof during the filming of Being Bobbi Brown, and here's the kicker. None of that is on camera, so I'm a little skeptical about that part of the timeline. Nick in other tweets had said that he started to be in the family when he was 16, so I don't know. Did the cameras just miss him? Was he being kept hidden for some reason? Or is Nick correct? He actually joined the family when he was 16. But eventually, though, Nick did make his way into their home for good. And he claims that it wasn't until high school that's when his mom kicked him out. His birth mom. And reports suggest that the real reason that Nick got the boot from his birth mom was that he was in trouble with drugs and he had a rebellious streak. Whatever the case, Nick ended up living with Whitney.
My life changed dramatically when I met Chrissy and Whitney. I was going to high school. My mom had kicked me out of the house.
Nicholas turned 18 in May. I believe he started living with Whitney and Bobbi Kristina during 2008 after his 18th birthday.
But they had been very close for a long time.
Correct.
And from there, he became part of the family, raised almost like a son by Whitney herself. In fact, it's easy to imagine because she did grow up with two brothers after all, and maybe what she saw in Nick was the kind of sibling connection that Chrissy, as an only child, was missing. But there also may be another sinister reason that Bobbi Brown believes that we'll discuss in a little bit. So Nick became Bobbi Kristina's unofficial but kind of official brother. The only thing not making him an actual brother is that Whitney never legally adopted him. But the three of them, Nick, Whitney, and Chrissy, lived together as one big, unconventional family. Yet, as time passed, things started to shift. For one, there's no evidence of Nick joining the family on their trips to Laguna Beach, and maybe that's where the cracks began to show with the relationship between Whitney and Chrissy. Could it be that Chrissy, longing for a stable life with consistent friends, wanted to move back to Atlanta? Maybe wanted to be back with Nick? She had been on the road almost all of her childhood. Maybe what she wanted most was a deeper connection and to feel more grounded. Maybe Chrissy believed that her family, her true family unit, was away from the cameras and the glare and LA and the constant media circus. But whatever the reason, it was clear that Nick and Chrissy's bond ran deep, complicated, and messy, but it was undeniably there. And the problem is this unit of friends and supposed stability that Chrissy thought she had was anything but. Classmates at her high school described her as very nice, but that she was a hard partier. By the time Chrissy was 14 years old, it was reported that she was already addicted to drugs. She'd lived a life that a young teen should have never experienced and should have never known. It was also reported that she first accompanied Whitney to rehab in Antigua at age 12. And according to Nick, the three of them had gone to rehab 3 times before Whitney's passing.
Whitney and Bobbi Kristina and Nick attended rehab together a number of times, actually
Correct.
3 times. So you're saying Whitney was going because she had the problem.
Yes, sir.
And she took Nick into rehab even though he did not have a problem?
Mm-hmm. 2 to 3 times.
Wow, I've never heard that. I've been doing this 35 years. I've never heard of anybody taking a posse to rehab. Was Bobbi Kristina there as support, or was she there because she had a problem?
I'm assuming she had her problem, sir.
Eerily, Chrissy's drugs of choice were the exact same drugs that were problems for her mother: marijuana, alcohol, and cocaine. According to Nick, the three of them would smoke weed often together. And here's the question: was Whitney only California sober when she decided to make her comeback, when she did rehab, or did she want them all to quit cold turkey? That is a question that really has never been answered. But what we do know is that at some point, after Whitney's comeback, she started to fall back into her old habits. Some say it was around the time that it was final that she realized that Bobbi was never coming back. And Whitney was devastated when she found out that Bobbi Brown's girlfriend had become pregnant. There was really no coming back from that. And maybe as a way to cope, that's when Whitney went back into her old habits. During this time, the Three Musketeers made it back to the townhome in Georgia. In retrospect, Bobbi Brown believes that Whitney having Nick around was more for herself than it was for Chrissy. He said, "It didn't make any sense to me why my ex-wife would let some grown-ass man live in the house with my 13 or 14-year-old daughter. I heard stories from some of my friends in Atlanta that he used to hang around Chrissy's middle school, which was extremely suspicious to me because he was at least 5 years older than the middle schoolers. What would a 17 or 18-year-old want with middle schoolers? I didn't have enough information about him to be comfortable with the arrangement. I started to suspect that his presence was more about Whitney than Chrissy. I began to believe he was providing my ex-wife with drugs."
I would be on the phone with Nick and I can hear Whitney asking for the stuff. You know, I would be on the phone with Nick when Whitney would ask for it. It was there before Whitney died.
She would ask for what?
Same stuff they were doing. It's the same situation. This wasn't something that just came about when Whitney died and they started doing that. This has been around since before Nick.
Whitney was allowing drug use in the house?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And participating.
Mm-hmm.
What is clear is that the sober era for the trio did not last long, and their ugly cycle of addiction unfortunately came back into the fold. Whitney started missing shows. There was video footage of her becoming erratic, and that was starting to air. And on the night before the Grammys, Whitney and Chrissy, who had just finished high school, by the way, had hit the bar with her mother. A source has already claimed that Whitney and Chrissy always partied together. And once again, here's the theme that they were more like best friends than mother and daughter. That night, Whitney was singing, and there was a fight because Whitney believed that there was a woman who was flirting with her man at the time, Ray J. And a fight ensued, and the night ended on a sour note. That night, Chrissy, who had her own room at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, fixed herself a bath and somehow ended up falling asleep or blacking out in the water. And Whitney had this sixth sense. Her intuition that night was to check on Chrissy. Whitney said that God told her to go and check in on Chrissy. And Whitney saved her. She rescued Chrissy out of the water, and she held her the entire night. That next morning, Whitney told her entourage that Chrissy had almost died, and she told Nick Gordon and her friend Sean McGill to get away from that water. She said that water is evil. Stay away from the water. But what is so frightening is that I wish Whitney had listened to her own words, her own advice, and stayed away from that evil water, because just a few hours later, that same fate would succumb to Whitney in the bathroom, in her own hotel room, mere feet away. Whitney, on that fateful day, decided to take a bath, and she asked an assistant to go fetch her 2 cupcakes. The assistant left, and by the time she came back about 30 minutes later, she opened the door, went towards the bathroom, and as she started to walk, her feet and legs were covered in water. And she ran to check in on Whitney, who she found tragically lying face down in a tub of water. Whitney was gone. Friends and family did everything they could to keep the news from Chrissy because they did not want her to see the body and felt that it would be too traumatizing for her. But eventually, with all the commotion and all the noises in the hallway of the lobby, Chrissy eventually realized what was going on, and she realized that her mom was gone. Chrissy was in hysterics. She had a complete mental breakdown, and she was taken to the hospital twice in 48 hours, once on the night of her mom's death, and again the day after. Chrissy was a broken woman. And it was even reported by several family members that she couldn't cope with the funeral service of her mom. She left the service early, and family members were told that she was getting high in a hotel room. They also alleged that just the year prior, Chrissy had been in rehab, And after the death of her mother, Chrissy didn't get any closer to family members. Instead, she alienated her family members and grew closer to Nick. The pair, who had been quasi-brother and sister for nearly almost a decade, instantly changed from friends to lovers. And it was just weeks after Whitney's passing that the Houston side of the family decided to subject Christy to yet again another disaster reality TV show, this time on our own, The Houstons. And while they claimed that the show was all about the whole family moving on, to be honest, the only person that the public really had an interest in was Bobbi Kristina, and many felt that she was being exploited.
You began filming the show just 3 months after Whitney's death. And I know it's important in terms of making some money, but would Bobbi Kristina not have been better off if you didn't do a reality show? If you didn't show her visiting her mother's grave with cameras on her, if you just let her grow up to have a life without the kind of attention that maybe contributed in a way perhaps to her own mother's death.
After Whitney passed, Nick seemed to step in as both a protector and a disturbingly romantic partner to Bobbi Kristina. It would take near weeks after the death of Whitney for Nick Gordon and Chrissy to announce that they were engaged.
You think Whitney would be happy that you guys are maybe engaged?
She would be very happy, actually. That's actually what she wanted.
And to add to the strangeness, the rest of the family had no idea of the shift in their relationship status. They had always known Nick as Chrissy's brother. Yet Nick insists that Whitney had known about their romantic relationship before her death. And shockingly, even though no one else knew about it, Nick said that Whitney gave her blessing. So if that were true, my question is, why did Bobbi Kristina have her own room at the Beverly Hilton the night that Whitney passed? If they were truly an official couple, as Nick claims, wouldn't they have shared a room and he wouldn't have had his own room and Bobbi Kristina wouldn't have had her own room? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But perhaps even more telling are the financial motivations behind Nick's actions. Could it be that Nick was driven not by love, but by an expectation of inheritance? If Whitney truly saw him as her surrogate son, is it possible that he believed that he would have been included in her will? I mean, he does claim that Whitney told him he would never have to work again. But what Nick found out is that he was not included in the will. Instead, Whitney's most recent will was actually created many years before, in 1993, when she was still married to Bobbi Brown. And Whitney had left everything to her only daughter. A $20 million fortune was to be handed to Bobbi Kris in installments, with the first portion, $2 million, set to be given to Chrissy by her 21st birthday. She was also set to receive an additional 17%, which is around $3 million by the time she was 25 years old, and the remaining balance around $15 million at the age of 30. And it just so happened that at the time of Whitney's death, Bobbi Kristina had just turned 19 years old, still 2 years away from the inheritance. And all of a sudden, Nick is Chrissy's boyfriend? How convenient. So why, after Whitney's death, was Nick so determined to be a part of Bobbi Kristina's life in such a profound way? The answer may lie less in genuine affection and more in the promise of access to an unimaginable fortune, one he would never receive directly, but one he could potentially manipulate his way into if he was tied legally to Bobbi Kristina. So was it love, or was it something far more calculating? I say, follow the money. It's the only thing you need to know.
I was concerned about the change that he made after everything had happened, you know, from being brother to lover. It hit me right here. I'm thinking that, you know, is this guy going for inheritance? What's really going on here?
For the next 2 years, Chrissy and Nick would flaunt their love all over social media. They would go out on a lot of trips. They were always spending money. Nick would flaunt all of his new purchases on social media and things that he would purchase for Chrissy, and he swore he wasn't using Whitney's money. No, he said that he had invested his money in the stock market well. And there were also reports that the townhome that they had lived in with Whitney was in disarray and not very well taken care of due to the excessive partying, but also because they were constantly leaving for vacations and travel. And at one point, there were 16 or 17 suitcases all filled with new clothing because each time they would leave for a trip, instead of using their old clothing, they would go on new shopping sprees, fill up the suitcase with brand new clothing before coming back and doing the same thing over and over again. The partying and the drug use just continued to escalate to the point that friends around them started passing away due to accidental overdoses. Nick had received a DUI, and Chrissy herself got into an accident, although police do not think that she was under the influence. Amidst the chaos, one figure loomed large: Nick. Their relationship was volatile and possessive, with Nick emerging as almost this controlling presence in Chrissy's life, and family members raised alarm, questioning Nick's true intentions. Was he really the loving brother he claimed to be, or was he using his position for financial gain? Nick and Chrissy's relationship quickly turned toxic, and as her grief from her mother's death deepened, she began to rely more heavily on him. And perhaps predictably, their bond soon morphed into something far darker. Their reality show served as a window into their troubled world, with Chrissy appearing increasingly frail, unstable, and at times intoxicated. Behind the scenes, things grew even more disturbing. Tensions with Nick escalated, and according to reports, he was seen manipulating Bobbi Kristina's bank accounts, isolating her from her family, and controlling every aspect of her life. When family members expressed concern, Nick was quick to shut them out, alienating Chrissy from the people who loved her most, the people that had her best interest in mind, and the people that would protect her.
And no one knew that from a godson that you would turn into a boyfriend. No one knew that.
And as the months wore on, Chrissy's physical and mental state deteriorated. She began posting cryptic messages on social media, and her once vibrant face was now gaunt, her eyes hollow. The same destructive patterns that had defined her mother's life seemed to be repeating themselves in Chrissy's world. And while the world was horrified by what they saw, Nick was making excuses for Chrissy's appearance. And for the record, she was made that way. Why change? I know she is beautiful, and so do so again. F you. My baby is perfect the way she is. Y'all reporters on my can mad because you're is a 400-pounder. Working out, eating right, and loving life is how my woman keeps her body. Nobody cares that you were concerned. What's important is she's comfy. Is that she's comfy, really? Chrissy and Nick's relationship continued to worsen with time. They would fight with each other over perceived infidelities and jealousy. And according to friend and roommate Daniela Bradley, Nick eventually became physical with Chrissy, even at one point knocking out one of her teeth.
It says the defendant, which is Nick Gordon, physically abused Bobbi Kristina. Do you have any knowledge, one way or the other, as to whether or not that is a true statement?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me what you know about abuse of Bobbi Kristina by Nick Gordon.
Nothing other than what she has told me.
Which was what?
That she had been physically abused by him before.
Did she say in what way?
Hitting, pushing, throwing.
It goes on to state that afterwards he began kicking Bobbi Kristina in the side to the point that she was on the floor screaming and curled up in a fetal position. As a result of the defendant's attack, Bobbi Kristina's tooth was knocked out and blood was on the floor. Were you a witness to that?
Yes.
Chrissy seemed to be fed up at one point towards the beginning of 2015. By this time, she had reunited with her dad, and she wanted to fly out to LA and start working with him on getting her singing career going. Bobbi had even bought Chrissy a plane ticket, and she had planned on moving out there. She was leaving in 2 days. And on January 29th, 2015, 2 days before she was going to fly out to move to be closer to her dad in LA, Chrissy posted the following ominous tweets. January 29th. I get hit. I get up. 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 Get knocked down 7 times. Get up 8. She also tweeted, on my own. Let's start this career up and moving out to you all quick, shall we? Pisces, because she was born in March. Pisces have a hard time accepting reality. Once they do realize it, it hits them like a ton of bricks. Chrissy was finally ready to break free. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, the kind of hope that comes with reclaiming control over her life. And she was determined to start over, to leave behind the shadows of her past, and to carve out a future on her own terms. The words that she typed into her phone that day were supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with dreams of independence and a life beyond turmoil, and living up to the legacy that she had wanted to fulfill by being Whitney Houston's daughter. The words she typed into her phone that day were the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with dreams of independence and a life beyond the turmoil, and one without Nick. But tragically, those would be the last texts that Chrissy would ever send. 2 days later, her body was found lifeless, face down in a tub. The scene echoed with painful irony the same fate that had claimed her mother.
Cardiac arrest, 21-year-old female in the bathtub, face down, CDs en route. There's CPR in progress.
Right now, we're treating this investigation as a medical call. It is bizarre that the same type of incident would happen involving a mother and a daughter.
It was a haunting, tragic full circle that no one could have predicted, not even Chrissy herself. The details of that fateful night remain clouded in mystery, shrouded by the complex and painful web of her tumultuous relationships, addiction, and the underbelly of fame that often destroys those who seek to bask in its glow. Chrissy's final days were marred by chaos, her relationships teetering on the edge of disaster. On January 31st, 2015, at around 6 a.m., Chrissy and her boyfriend had an explosive argument after he returned home from a long night of partying. And according to a lawsuit filed by the Brown family, Nick had been out on a cocaine and alcohol bender. And while Chrissy grew increasingly suspicious of his behavior, she believed that he had been cheating on her with strippers that night, and when he returned, the confrontation was inevitable. But the argument took an unexpected turn. Nick, enraged by what he believed to be Chrissy's infidelity, found surveillance footage of cigarette butts and alcohol brands that didn't belong to her, and he jumped to conclusions, convinced that she was having an affair. What followed was a tense and volatile exchange that lasted for more than 30 minutes, with two other individuals, Daniela Bradley and Max Lomez, present in the home. And in the midst of the chaos, the lawsuit from the Browns claimed that Nick mixed a toxic cocktail, a potent concoction of drugs and alcohol, and gave it to Chrissy, rendering her unconscious. And what happened next is haunting. Nick allegedly placed her face down in a tub filled with cold water, causing her to suffer severe brain damage. Her autopsy revealed a deadly combination of morphine, cocaine, alcohol, and prescription drugs in her system. The medical examiner could not definitively conclude whether her death was an accident, suicide, or something far more sinister, ruling the cause as undetermined. But the circumstances surrounding her death and the subsequent behavior of those closest to her raised chilling concerns. Nick's actions in the days that followed were equally unsettling. He insisted that he had no role in the tragedy, but his behavior painted a different picture. He was withdrawing thousands of dollars from Chrissy's bank account, he was evading attempts by family members to seek answers, and he acted in a way that only fueled suspicion. It was as if he was trying to erase his involvement and to disappear into the fog of uncertainty that had now enveloped the family. For months, Chrissy's loved ones held vigil at her bedside, praying for a miracle. But besides their hope, the damage was too great. On July 26, 2015, Bobbi Kristina Brown was pronounced dead at the age of 22, her vibrant life cruelly cut short. And in a tragic twist, her passing seemed like the inevitable conclusion to a story that had started long before. Bobbi Kristina had always been haunted by the shadow of her mother, Whitney Houston, a woman who had once been the brightest star in the music industry, only to succumb to the darkness of addiction. In many ways, Chrissy had spent her entire life trying to step out of that shadow, but the odds were stacked against her from the moment she was born. On September 16, 2016, the court held Nick Gordon legally responsible for Bobbi Kristina's death, awarding her family a staggering $36 million in damages. But no amount of money could ever bring back Chrissy or undo the years of pain that had led to her untimely death. Nick Gordon would also come to a similar demise, dying from an overdose years later. Bobbi Kristina's story is a tragic echo of her mother's, a stark reminder of the perils that come with living in the public eye. where fame and fortune are often accompanied by devastating personal costs. The price of fame can be unforgiving, and for Chrissy, it proved to be too much. One family member summed up the tragedy with heartbreaking simplicity. Chrissy always wanted to be with her mommy, and in a way, she finally got her wish. Together, mother and daughter reunited at last. But as we reflect on Chrissy's life, it's important to look deeper, not just at the tragic end, but also at the complicated legacy of her parents. Whitney's rise to superstardom was legendary, and so was Bobbi's. But also, so was their fall. Chrissy's life was forever shaped by their turbulent legacy, one that went from fame to falling victim to addiction and heartbreak. This is the story about the price of success, the struggle for redemption, and the heartbreaking cost of living under the constant glare of the spotlight. And it's a story that you have to hear.